The night was silent, except for the soft rustle of bamboo leaves whispering against the wind, as if the forest itself was trying to speak a forgotten truth. There is a moment, just before dawn breaks, when the world feels suspended, neither dark nor light, neither yesterday nor today. It was during such a moment that an ancient tale was said to have been born, a tale passed quietly between generations of warriors who understood that the greatest battles are always fought in silence, long before steel ever touches steel. They say a lone samurai once walked through a narrow mountain path carrying no weapon but the discipline carved into his spirit. His steps were deliberate, measured, each one an echo of a lifetime's worth of training, and though he walked alone, the weight of centuries walked with him. His name has been lost to time, overshadowed by legends like Miyamoto Musashi and Kojiro Sasaki, yet those who knew the truth whispered that this unnamed warrior carried a single rule in his heart that made him invincible. Not because he was flawless, but because he was unshakable. He paused beneath a weathered torii gate, his breath forming a faint mist in the cold dawn. The world around him smelled of wet earth and pine, and the faint glow on the horizon brushed the edges of his face with gold. He closed his eyes, listening, not to the world, but to the quiet storm inside himself. Fear, doubt, desire, pride, all swirling like unsettled dust, and then with slow certainty, he exhaled them out as if releasing demons from the confines of his chest. For a samurai knows that the warrior defeated within needs no enemy without. The echo of a distant temple bell rolled through the valley. It wasn't the hour that mattered, but the meaning. In Zen monasteries across Japan, monks would rise at this exact moment, not because they felt ready, but because readiness was irrelevant. The discipline was the master, and they were its students. The unnamed samurai stepped forward, and with that simple motion, his journey began. A journey not toward a battlefield, but toward the truth of the rule that forged warriors capable of bending fate itself. Centuries later, a young Miyamoto Musashi would sit alone in a cave, practicing strokes in the air, his sword unused yet sharper than ever. He wrote in his scrolls that victory is shaped long before combat, in the hours when no one is watching, in the moments when apathy and weakness whisper seductions of ease. Musashi believed a man's spirit is either strengthened or broken in silence, not in battle. And it is in that silence that the rule is born again and again, rising from the ashes of every doubt. As the story unfolds, you will walk through the paths they walked, breathe the air they breathed, and feel the weight of their questions. Every step will draw you closer to understanding the single rule the samurai carried, the rule that can make any person unstoppable, not by force, not by aggression, but by mastery of the self in ways most modern minds have forgotten. And so our journey begins, in that dim morning light, where the air smells of incense and rain, and the spirit of ancient Japan stirs awake. You stand at the threshold of the torii gate with the unnamed samurai, feeling the first stir of a truth older than your fears, older than your ambitions, older even than the blades that shaped history. The rule has not yet been revealed, but you can feel it, like the rumble of distant thunder before the storm breaks. A quiet intensity, gathering strength in the stillness. As the samurai walks deeper into the path, he enters a memory, a lesson passed to him when he was only a boy sweeping the courtyard of a small countryside dojo. He remembered the voice of his master, old and weathered like an ancient oak but filled with a solidity that seemed unbreakable. The master never raised his voice, yet every word carved itself into the heart like a chisel striking stone. The boy had once asked why the master trained even when there was no threat, no battle, no enemy. The master simply smiled and kept sweeping the stones, each movement patient and deliberate. Only years later would the boy understand what that silent smile meant. Now, as a grown warrior, he could finally feel the truth unfolding inside him. It wasn't about the sword, it wasn't about speed, it wasn't even about strength. It was about something far more elemental, something invisible that every true samurai must learn to shape with his own hands. The path curved, the bamboo forest thickened, shadows deepened, and the world seemed to tighten around him like a test. The samurai kept walking, one step after another, never rushing, never hesitating, and beneath his steady breath, a question pulsed like a heartbeat. What is the rule? What is the single discipline that can shape a warrior from the inside out? The forest offered no answer, but the silence itself seemed to smile. The journey toward the rule had begun. The path narrowed as the bamboo rose taller, bending slightly overhead until the forest looked like a living cathedral woven from green pillars and golden morning light. The samurai moved forward, no longer as a lone wanderer but as a man stepping deeper into the heart of his own past. Every sound grew sharper, the drip of dew sliding from leaf to leaf, the quiet thump of his sandals on the dirt, the slow inhale of a world awakening. Each detail reminded him of the lessons carved into him long before he ever held a blade. In the distance, a faint memory flickered, like a lantern swinging in an empty hallway. The young boy he once was stood trembling on a wooden training floor. His hands were raw from gripping the bokken. Sweat dripped down his face. His master circled him slowly, not with the presence of a predator, but with the calm weight of a mountain that had seen storms come and go for centuries. The boy was exhausted, shaking, nearly ready to drop his practice sword, but the master's voice cut through his weakness like the first crack of thunder. "Your enemy is not the man before you," the master said. "Your enemy is the moment you decide you have done enough." The boy swung again, and again, and again, not because he felt strong, but because the old man's presence seemed to burn away every excuse like mist in the morning sun. And now, years later, the adult samurai walking through the forest could still feel the truth heavy in his chest. As he pushed deeper into the bamboo maze, he came upon a clearing lit with a soft ethereal glow. A temple stood silently at its center, its wooden beams scarred by weather and war, yet still standing tall. Prayer flags fluttered gently, carrying messages of old monks into the wind. The scent of incense drifted from within, blending with the sweet smell of moss and wet stone. It was here, in places like this, that many warriors once came to confront the battles hidden behind their eyes. Inside the dim temple, a single candle burned on the altar. The flame flickered, small yet steady, as if determined to survive the drafts of time. The samurai approached it, closing his eyes for a moment, and in that stillness, echoes of another story surfaced. One from the life of Miyamoto Musashi, who once sought solitude in a cave known as Reigandar, staring into the cold stone walls, until his own weaknesses revealed themselves like ghosts hiding behind his ribs. Musashi understood that a warrior who cannot face himself becomes fragile, easily broken by the world. That is why he trained relentlessly when no eyes watched him. He honed not only his sword but his breath, his patience, his stillness. He knew that the true war was fought in the unnoticed hours before dawn, after exhaustion, during silence. The samurai touched the wooden floor beneath him. It was smooth, worn by generations of disciplined footsteps. He imagined monks sweeping this very space every morning, not because it needed cleaning, but because the act of sweeping was training. Every stroke of the broom was a strike against laziness. Every early morning was a victory over the mind's craving for comfort. Such simplicity carried a power deeper than swordsmanship itself. As he left the temple, the wind shifted. The air felt heavier, charged with a subtle tension. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a figure standing near the edge of the forest, an old swordsman with a posture straight as iron and eyes that held an entire lifetime of war and peace. The old man raised his chin slightly, acknowledging the traveler in a gesture both respectful and challenging. "You walk with many questions," the old swordsman said, voice gravelly yet calm, "but questions are not answered by walking, they are answered by becoming." His words hung in the air like the final note of a bell. The samurai bowed slightly. He didn't speak, for there was nothing to say. The elder's presence held a gravity that needed no explanation. The old swordsman turned, pointing toward a steep trail rising up the mountainside. Mist curled around the rocks like drifting spirits. "Climb," he said. "At the top, you may find what you seek, but be warned, the mountain reveals nothing to a man who still hopes for ease." The samurai looked at the path. It was long, rugged, and unforgiving, but he stepped forward without hesitation. The journey had already begun to reshape him, reminding him that every step toward mastery demands a sacrifice, comfort, ego, impatience, sometimes even identity. The higher he climbed, the more the world around him transformed. The trees thinned, the air cooled, and the land opened into vast views of valleys wrapped in morning clouds. His breath grew heavier, his legs burned, yet each moment of struggle carved something new into him. There were no spectators, no applause, no recognition, only the mountain, only the wind, only the quiet war waged between his determination and his exhaustion. And slowly, something became clear. The samurai rule he sought was not a phrase written in an old scroll. It was not a technique passed from master to student. It was something lived, something earned, something forged in the fires of solitary effort. By the time he reached the final ridge, his mind had grown quiet. Thoughts came and went like leaves brushing past in the wind, and in that silence, he felt the presence of an understanding taking shape, still unseen but undeniable. The rule was close, and the mountain seemed to hold its breath. At the top of the ridge, the world opened like the unfurling of an ancient scroll. Clouds moved beneath his feet, drifting slowly across the valleys like silent guardians. The wind carried the scent of snow and stone, sharp and pure, as if untouched by time. Standing there, the samurai felt the immensity of the land stretch endlessly in every direction, reminding him that a warrior's path is both infinitely vast and painfully narrow. Vast because potential knows no limits, narrow because discipline demands a single step taken with unwavering intent. He closed his eyes and let the wind wash over him. For a moment, he felt weightless, suspended between sky and earth, and in that fragile space, memories surfaced like soft ripples, disturbing a still pond. He remembered being a young apprentice following his master into the mountains at dawn. The old man had walked ahead silently, leaving footprints in the snow, deep, evenly spaced, and perfectly aligned as if carved by a craftsman's hands. The boy had struggled to place his own feet in those prints. Sometimes he stumbled, sometimes he lagged behind, but the master never slowed, never turned, never explained. Only when they reached the summit did the master finally speak. "Discipline," he had said, "is not the path others show you, it is the path you choose to follow even when your teacher is gone." The adult samurai opened his eyes again. Standing before him on the ridge was not his old master, but a vision of another legend, Togo Shigakata, a samurai famed for the Jigun Ryu style of swordsmanship. Togo was known to practice thousands of downward strikes each day, so many that his arms would tremble uncontrollably long after training ended. Yet every morning, he began again with the same unwavering intent. Someone had once asked him why he trained with such ferocity. His answer was simple: "Because the moment I stop, my spirit weakens, and a weakened spirit invites defeat." The samurai watched this imagined figure swing his sword downward with explosive precision, each strike powerful enough to split the very air. The sound echoed across the ridge, dull, rhythmic, unrelenting. It wasn't the sound of violence, it was the sound of a spirit forging itself in the furnace of repetition. The samurai felt a tremor of understanding ripple through him. He stepped closer to the edge of the ridge where the stone had been smoothed by centuries of wind. Below, the land looked like a vast living painting. Rice fields, winding rivers, clusters of villages, and the distant shimmer of lake water reflecting the morning sun. From up here, everything seemed connected, each detail part of a tapestry shaped by both chaos and order. He inhaled deeply. The air was cold enough to sting, but it energized him. As he stood there, the mountain wind whispered another story, one about a lesser-known samurai named Hirano Toshiharu, a retainer of the Takeda clan. Hirano was once mocked for his slow sword technique. Other warriors surpassed him easily in speed and flair, but Hirano never paid attention to their laughter. He simply trained the same movement over and over with perfect form, refining every inch of the motion until it became an extension of his soul. Years later, on a battlefield drenched in mud and rain, Hirano faced an enemy twice as strong and far faster, yet with a single flawless strike, so precise that it seemed almost effortless, he ended the battle. Warriors who had once laughed fell silent, realizing that speed means nothing without mastery, and mastery means nothing without discipline maintained for years in the dark where no one sees. The samurai felt the stories weave into him, like threads stitching his spirit together. Each tale carried the same hidden truth, circling him like hawks riding the mountain winds: discipline, repetition, training beyond exhaustion, confronting the self, defeating the ego. These were clues, fragments of a greater whole. As he turned away from the ridge, he noticed a narrow trail descending toward a shadowed forest far below. The trail looked dangerous, barely visible, like something carved by wandering monks centuries ago, but he felt drawn to it. Without hesitation, he started down, feeling the terrain shift from cold stone to soft earth beneath his feet. With every step into the descending forest, light faded. The canopy closed overhead, branches twisting like old hands reaching through time. The sounds of the mountain disappeared, replaced by the steady beat of his own heartbeat. It echoed louder and louder, filling the silence. Halfway down, he encountered a small shrine hidden between two massive cedar trees. The shrine was old, its red paint faded, its roof covered in moss. A single stone lantern stood beside it, cracked yet somehow still standing. The place felt sacred, as if countless warriors had once stood here, offering their fears to the forest and receiving clarity in return. He knelt in front of the shrine and placed his hands together, not in prayer, but in reflection. The soil beneath him was cool, grounding. The air smelled of cedar resin and distant rain, and in that silence, he heard the faint echo of a voice, not his master's, not a monk's, but something ancient and internal. You seek the rule, but the rule is not hidden, it is resisted. The words settled into him like embers sinking into dry wood. He remained kneeling, letting them burn. And slowly the realization dawned that the next step on his journey would take him not forward, but deeper, into the shadows within himself, that he had spent a lifetime trying to outpace. The forest waited. The deeper he walked into the forest, the quieter the world became, as if sound itself had been stripped away to force him inward. The canopy grew so dense that sunlight barely filtered through, leaving only thin spears of light that pierced the darkness like the points of invisible arrows. Each step landed softly on a bed of fallen leaves, muted, cautious, deliberate. The air thickened, carrying the smell of damp soil and ancient cedar. It felt as though the forest was not simply a place, but a living memory, an echo of every warrior who had once passed through it, searching for truth. The samurai felt a faint trembling in his chest, not of fear, but of anticipation. He sensed this part of the journey demanded something more from him than physical endurance. As he continued walking, the trees seemed to bend closer, narrowing the path until it felt like a corridor leading not through nature but through the depths of his own spirit. Shadows twisted across the ground, shifting with the subtle movement of branches overhead, forming shapes that resembled figures from his past. There, in the dappled darkness, he saw the faint outline of his younger self, broken, frustrated, gripping his training sword with bruised hands. Then came the stern gaze of his master, the cold wind of the mountaintop where he had nearly collapsed. The lonely nights spent practicing forms while others slept, the battles he had won, and the ones that had scarred him. The forest reflected everything back at him, but in distorted fragments, like shards of a shattered mirror. He paused, pressing his palm against the trunk of a massive cedar. The bark was rough, grounding him the way a warrior anchors himself before a strike. His breath echoed through the silence, deeper now, more aware, more honest. Then he heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind, a voice that didn't belong to the forest, but to memory. Face what you flee. He turned sharply, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. But there was no one, only the whisper lingering like a ghost in the air. He continued walking until he reached another clearing, this one dim and circular, surrounded by towering trees that formed a natural arena. The ground here was bare, as though countless feet had scuffed away the leaves over centuries of secret training. In the middle stood a weathered wooden post marked with deep cuts from countless practice strikes. The samurai stepped toward it slowly. He placed his hand over one of the cuts and traced its depth with his fingertips. These marks were not from a single warrior. They were layered, centuries of dedication carved into the wood by countless hands, each one fighting their weaknesses with repetitive, disciplined force. As he stood there, absorbing the weight of this place, a memory unfolded before him like a vision. He saw a young warrior from generations past, thin, exhausted, but relentless, striking the very post with a wooden sword as dawn broke behind him. Sweat poured down his body, mixing with dirt and blood from his blistered hands. Each strike echoed like a war drum through the forest, and with each one, the young warrior whispered the same phrase under his breath. Not yet, he struck again, and again. Not yet. Not until his body quit, not until his mind broke, not until he found the strength beyond strength. The samurai watched the vision, realizing the young warrior wasn't fighting an opponent. He was fighting the voice inside that begged him to stop. The image dissolved gently, fading back into the stillness of the clearing. The samurai gripped his own sword tightly, and felt the pulse of his heartbeat travel through the hilt. He raised the blade slowly, then stopped. Not because of doubt, but because he recognized a truth, that the blade wasn't what this clearing demanded. It wasn't steel that revealed the rule. It was honesty. He sheathed his sword, and instead knelt in the center of the arena, pressing both hands into the earth. The soil was cold, damp, and full of life. As he knelt there, the forest seemed to exhale, the branches above swaying gently as if acknowledging his intent. In the stillness, another story came to him, one whispered among monks about a samurai who once sought enlightenment through combat alone. This warrior believed mastery meant perfect swordplay, but he was defeated repeatedly by weaker opponents. Broken and humbled, he retreated to a Zen temple and demanded to be taught the secret to victory. The head monk simply handed him a bucket of water and told him to carry it up the mountain every morning before sunrise. Confused, the samurai obeyed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The samurai's shoulders grew stronger, his breath deeper, his patience longer, but he still felt lost. One morning, after spilling the bucket yet again, he collapsed in frustration. The monk approached him and said, "Your failure is not in the water you spill, it is in the discipline you refuse to build." The samurai realized his greatest battle had never been with opponents. It had been with the part of him that avoided the monotony necessary for mastery. The forest grew still again. The samurai in the clearing opened his eyes. Sweat glistened on his brow. The air around him felt heavier, as though it waited for him to admit a truth he had long avoided. He whispered it to himself, barely audible. "I have resisted the rule because living it demands everything." The leaves trembled as though acknowledging his confession. Deep inside, he felt something shift, a door opening to the next stage of his journey, pulling him toward a deeper confrontation. He rose slowly, knowing the forest would not allow him forward until he looked into the darkest place a warrior can face, the part of him that breaks when no one is watching. And with steady breath, he stepped toward the path leading deeper into the shadows. The forest darkened further as he stepped into the next stretch of shadow, the air growing colder, the light thinning until even the outlines of trees became silhouettes fading in and out of existence. Every step forward felt heavier, as if someone or something was gripping at his ankles, trying to pull him back toward the familiar comfort of ignorance. But he kept walking because he knew now that comfort was the real enemy. Comfort was the battlefield where warriors died quietly, without blades, without honor, without even realizing the fight had begun. A soft mist rose from the ground, weaving between the trees like wandering spirits. The forest floor dipped until he found himself standing before a river, a narrow but relentless current rushing between jagged rocks. The water was icy blue, its roar low and constant, echoing off the cliffs on either side. Across the river, a stone path led into an even darker part of the forest, but no bridge connected the two banks. The samurai stood on the edge, staring into the churning water. The river felt symbolic, a barrier not meant to be crossed by strength alone. He stepped closer and dipped his fingers into the current. The cold stung instantly, sharp as steel. He pulled his hand back, watching the droplets fall into the soil like tiny shattered pieces of himself. A faint voice reached him from behind, a calm, resonant tone that carried the weight of centuries. He turned and found an old monk standing at the tree line. The monk's robe was worn, patched in places, his posture relaxed yet impossibly steady, like a tree that had survived every storm nature could summon. His eyes were gentle, but behind them lay something unyielding. "You hesitate," the monk said softly. The samurai bowed. "The river is strong." "All rivers are," the monk replied, stepping closer, "but a warrior Sepp's true enemy is not the current before him, it is the current within him." The monk walked to the water's edge and looked out across it with serene eyes. Every warrior faces this river. Some try to leap across and fall. Some turn back, deciding the darkness beyond is not worth facing. And some, he said, kneeling beside the samurai, wait for the river to become gentle, hoping time will soften the challenge. The monk picked up a small stone and held it in his palm, but the river never becomes gentle. The world does not owe ease to anyone. He let the stone fall into the water, and the current instantly swept it away. The monk turned to him. "To cross, you must become stronger than the part of you that resists the crossing." The samurai stared into the water. The reflection that stared back was not calm, not centered. It flickered with doubt, fear, memories of failure, the echoes of mistakes he still carried, like hidden scars. The water showed not his face, but his weakness. He whispered, almost to himself, "I am afraid." The monk nodded. "Good. Only men who pretend they are fearless die with unanswered questions." Silence stretched between them, thick and honest. Finally, the monk continued, "There is a story you must hear before you cross." The samurai remained still. The monk began, "Long before your time, there was a warrior named Saito Yoshikage, known for his unmatched discipline. Every morning before sunrise, he climbed the steps of a mountain temple. Not once, not twice, but 37 times before he allowed himself to rest. It was said he did this every day, even when snow buried the steps, even when sickness weakened his body, even when war demanded his strength." The samurai listened, the river's roar blending with the monk's voice. One winter, the monk continued, Yoshikage became gravely ill. His students begged him to remain in bed, to recover, to preserve his strength. But Yoshikage rose anyway, and began climbing. After the 20th ascent, he collapsed. When his students reached him, he whispered, "Discipline is not the act of the strong. It is the refusal of the weak to remain weak." And with trembling legs, he climbed again. He died weeks later, not in battle, but with a spirit stronger than any blade. The monk looked directly into the samurai Sepp's eyes. Strength dies, bodies die, but the discipline you build becomes a force that continues long after flesh has faded. It becomes the truth of who you are. The river roared louder, as if demanding a decision. The monk spoke one final time. "You cannot carry fear across the water, you must carry yourself." And then, like a wisp of smoke, he vanished into the forest, leaving the samurai alone with the river and the truth it reflected. The samurai knelt and closed his eyes. He inhaled deeply, gathering every fragment of courage he possessed. When he opened his eyes, the river no longer looked like an obstacle. It looked like a threshold. He stepped into the water. The cold hit him like a shock, biting into his bones. The current pushed against his legs with relentless force. It pulled at him, threatened to throw him off balance. But he kept stepping forward, muscles trembling, breath sharp and quick. The river pressed harder, the current rising, swirling around him like an enemy determined to break him. Halfway through, his foot slipped on a slick stone. He fell to one knee, water crashing against his chest. The current roared in triumph, pulling him downward. For a moment, panic surged through him. But then he remembered the monk Sip's words. He steadied his breath. And he rose. Step by step, inch by inch, fighting both the river before him and the river inside him, he pushed forward. When he finally reached the opposite bank, soaked and shaking, he looked back at the river that had tried to claim him. It looked the same as before, cold, fast, merciless. But something within him was no longer the same. He had crossed. But the greatest confrontation still awaited him in the deep forest beyond. And with slow, steady breath, he stepped into the darkness. The forest on the far side of the river felt different, not simply darker, but heavier, almost ancient in its silence. The air was thick and unmoving, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see whether the samurai would continue or falter. Everything here felt untouched by human presence, as if centuries had passed without a single footstep. Each tree was massive, their trunks twisted like the ribs of old gods guarding a forbidden inner sanctum. He walked slowly, his wet clothes clinging to his skin, each step releasing steam into the cold air. The ground beneath him was softer now, padded with layers of fallen needles that muted his footsteps so thoroughly it felt like he was gliding instead of walking. His senses sharpened. The faint rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft crackle of something moving through underbrush far away. His entire body moved with instinctual wariness, not out of fear but out of deep respect for a place that demanded reverence. As he pushed deeper, the forest began to brighten, but not from sunlight. A pale glow shimmered between the trees ahead, a faint bluish light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Curiosity pulled him toward it. When he drew closer, he found the source, a massive stone gate standing in the middle of the forest with no walls connected to it, no structure around it, no pathway leading through it. It stood alone, ancient, carved with symbols too worn to decipher. But what struck him was what stood beneath the gate. A figure, a man, a samurai. He stood with perfect posture, hands folded behind his back, his expression calm yet unreadable. His armor was old, scratched, and dented from countless battles, but polished with care. His face was weathered, stern, and familiar, not because the samurai had seen him before, but because he sensed something deeply unsettling. This was him, not the man he currently was. the man he feared becoming. The older samurai raised his chin slightly, acknowledging him without emotion. So the figure said, his voice cold as steel on stone, "You have come." The younger samurai tightened his jaw. "What are you?" "I am the version of you shaped by hesitation," the figure replied. "I am who you become when you make promises you never keep. I am the man built from mornings you choose comfort over purpose. I am the result of training abandoned midway and dreams sacrificed to fear." The forest seemed to shrink around them, closing off every escape. "You crossed the river," the elder version continued, walking slowly toward him. "But every warrior who crosses eventually meets me, the self he tried to outrun." The samurai felt his pulse quicken, not from fear, but from recognition. The figure before him was not a demon or spirit. He was the embodiment of every moment the samurai had surrendered to doubt, every missed opportunity, every wasted day, every quiet compromise. And he carried a sword. The older version drew it slowly, the blade whispering through the air. The metal glowed faintly in the unnatural light. "You cannot walk forward while dragging me behind you." The samurai instinctively reached for his own sword. His fingers wrapped around the hilt, but before he drew it, the older version spoke again. "You think this is a battle of steel? Foolish, this is a battle of truth." He swept forward, striking so fast the samurai barely managed to dodge. The blade sliced through the air, humming with deadly precision. The force of the strike sent a rush of wind that scattered leaves across the clearing. The younger samurai drew his blade, exhaling steadily, grounding himself. The forest fell into absolute silence. The two versions of him circled each other, each step deliberate, measured, echoing the rhythm of years of training. The older version attacked again, and this time the samurai parried, sparks erupting from the clash of blades. He countered with a swift strike, but the older version blocked it effortlessly. "You fight with skill," the older man said, pressing forward, "but you lack resolve." Their swords collided again and again, the sound ringing out like thunderclaps. The younger samurai's muscles burned, his breath grew heavy, but he did not step back. He matched the older version strike for strike, each movement sharper, more precise. But something was wrong. No matter how fiercely he fought, the older version remained stronger, not physically, but in presence, in conviction, in familiarity. Every attack the younger samurai made felt like he was striking against a lifetime of his own excuses. And then, with a single powerful blow, the older version knocked his sword from his hands, sending it skidding across the forest floor. The samurai fell to one knee, breath ragged, chest heaving. The older version pointed his blade at him. "This is the weight of every moment you chose what was easy over what was necessary. This is who you become when discipline is the first sacrifice." The blade hovered inches from his face. "But you can still choose." The samurai closed his eyes, not out of surrender, but out of clarity. He inhaled deeply, feeling the sting of failure, the bitterness of regret, the pain of every wasted moment. He let it wash through him. He did not resist it. He accepted it. And in that acceptance, something inside him changed, sharp and sudden, like a spark catching dry tinder. He reached out slowly toward the ground and picked up a stone, not his sword, not a weapon, just a piece of earth. He rose to his feet with the stone in hand. The older version laughed a dry, empty sound. "That is your choice. A rock." The samurai nodded. A warrior does not win because of the weapon he holds. He wins because of the spirit that guides it. He hurled the stone with perfect accuracy. It struck the older version's wrist with a crack, forcing him to drop his blade. In the split second of surprise, the younger samurai surged forward, not for the sword, but to seize the older version's armor and stare straight into his eyes. "You are not my future," he said, voice steady. "You are my warning." The older version's expression flickered, softened, then dissolved like smoke dissipating into the air. His armor collapsed empty to the ground. The forest exhaled, and the strange bluish light faded. The samurai stood alone again. But something fundamental had shifted. He had finally faced the enemy that lived within him, and now, only now, was he ready to learn the rule. The forest air thickens as the night settles deeper, as though the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to take the next step in this journey. The path ahead feels different now, heavier, yet clearer, as though the samurai you've met so far have stripped away illusions layer by layer, revealing something raw and honest beneath the surface. And as you continue walking, Following that dim lantern glow deeper into the unknown, another voice emerges from the shadows, calm and steady like a river carving stone. It belongs to an older monk standing before a moss-covered torii gate, his robes fluttering faintly in the wind. He looks at you without surprise, as if he knew you would arrive at this exact moment. He turns and gestures you inside the monastery grounds, where the silence is so profound it feels alive. Lanterns flicker along old wooden walkways, and in the open courtyard a young samurai kneels in seiza, his back straight, his head bowed, dripping sweat though he remains perfectly still. The monk whispers that the young man has been sitting like this for 3 hours, practicing makuso, meditation before training, because his master believes stillness is harder to conquer than any opponent. You watch the young samurai struggle, his fingers twitch, his jaw tightens, his breathing trembles, his battle is invisible, yet more brutal than anything you've seen. Minutes pass, then suddenly, something shifts. His shoulders drop, his breath steadies, the storm within him settles. His eyes open with a faint glimmer of realization. The monk leans in and murmurs that this moment, the moment a warrior conquers himself, is the true test of strength. Not the clash of blades, not the victories others can see, but the victory no one ever witnesses. The victory over your own impatience, your own doubt, your own chaos. As you continue deeper into the monastery, you hear the rhythmic sound of wooden swords clashing. 2 samurai train under the moonlight, their movements sharp and precise, their footwork whispering across the stone ground. But their master only watches, his arms folded, his eyes unmoving. When they finish, drenched in sweat, he reprimands them calmly but firmly. He tells them that their strikes are strong but not true. Their bodies are disciplined, but their minds wander. Their swords cut the air, but their hearts cut themselves. The disciples bow in shame. The master then senses your presence and calls you forward. He asks if you noticed the flaw in their technique. You admit that you saw nothing wrong, their movements looked perfect. He nods, steps closer, and says perfection in form means nothing if the mind behind it is fragmented. A sword is only as sharp as the intention that wields it. A life is only as powerful as the clarity behind its actions. Without clarity, even the greatest warrior is just making noise. He taps the wooden floor lightly with his staff, and the sound echoes. He explains that every warrior walks through life surrounded by distractions, temptations, fears, and illusions. The world tries to pull you apart piece by piece. The samurai rule, the one that makes you unstoppable, requires you to bring yourself back into alignment again and again, no matter how many times the world scatters you, not once, not twice, but endlessly, relentlessly, without complaint. As you walk away, his words settle into your chest like embers waiting to ignite. The wind shifts, carrying the sound of a bamboo flute from another corner of the temple grounds. You follow it, drawn by its haunting, melancholic beauty, until you reach a small wooden pavilion overlooking a valley. An elderly samurai sits cross-legged inside, his hair silver, his posture unbroken. His sword rests beside him, though you sense he hasn't used it in many years. When he finishes playing, he greets you with a warmth that disarms you more than any blade could. He invites you to sit and asks what you believe strength really is. You hesitate before answering. He smiles because your silence tells him the truth, that you aren't sure. He begins telling you a story of his own past, of a time when he served a lord whose ambitions burned hotter than his wisdom. The samurai recounts how he once charged into battle fueled by pride, only to realize too late that true strength is not in overpowering others, but in preventing unnecessary conflict. The greatest warriors, he says, carry a sword but pray never to draw it. Their power lies not in violence but in restraint. He lifts his flute again but pauses before playing. He looks into your eyes and gently says that mastery demands sacrifice, but not the kind people expect. It is not the sacrifice of comfort alone, nor of sleep, nor of pleasures. It is the sacrifice of ego. The surrender of the need to be right, to be praised, to be seen. That sacrifice is the hardest, because no one applauds you for it. No one thanks you for it. Yet it is the sacrifice that frees you from the chains that bind most people forever. When he begins playing again, the music carries something ancient within it, a sorrow, a truth, a warning, and as you listen, your mind drifts back through the stories you've witnessed. Musashi carving discipline into the bones of frustration, the Ronin fighting the monster inside himself, the monk teaching that stillness is a battleground, the master insisting that clarity is a warrior's edge. the elder samurai showing that surrender is strength. All of these lessons swirl together like ink on parchment until they pulse with a single unspoken understanding. A realization forming, but not yet complete. As though the samurai rule you're searching for is right in front of you, waiting to be recognized, waiting for you to be ready. The breeze grows colder, the night grows deeper. The journey is far from over, but something inside you is beginning to shift, aligning itself quietly, preparing for the truth that approaches like dawn through a forest of shadows.